Welcome to Pandas Nightmares. In today's video, you will hear stories from people who have claimed to be abducted by aliens. If you do like my content, do like and subscribe as it will help me grow. Since I am a small channel, I am creating content to try to raise funds for my dad's treatment. So if you want to support his ongoing battle, the GoFundMe link is in the description section below. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And now, let's get started. Enjoy. Story 1. First time I ever tried to write this down. First time telling anyone outside the family. I'm leaving out time and location and some other details, because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly, I guess. Summer before 8th grade, me and 2 of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighborhood and go see these girls on the next block who were having a sleepover. We turn a corner in our neighborhood, and there's this huge black blimp-shaped thing in the sky. Like the pictures of the Hindenburg, but bigger than that, and as close, if not closer. Completely silent, and the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across. No exaggeration, even though I was young. We stare at it entranced, asking each other over and over again if we see it, which we all agree that we do, standing there, frozen in one place. It's like black, polished gunmetal. No lights, no sound, no anything. It's just hovering there. And then, I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumps. Next thing I remember is the craft ship government experiment. Whatever the hell it is, has gone, and there's a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to Earth, with wisps of smoke coming off it. Then 2 brand new black trucks with silver gearboxes on the back, like F-150s or S-10s, but nicer, came speeding down the street, going about 70 in a residential 25 miles per hour neighborhood. Then after that, I remember walking home to one of my friends' houses and going to bed. At that point it was like 5 or 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning, because he worked for the city but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my friends who was there, but the other was my best friend, and we sort of made an unspoken pact never to talk about it. Don't know how or why we did that. We all grew up, and I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect over Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us neither of us wanted to touch or talk about. Looking back on it now, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night, and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. But there were others, and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia, except in how we're not. I've thought about hypnosis, but that scared me too. Plus, I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then, and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there's no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. We're talking a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses just after midnight on a summer weekend night. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV. No words spoken about it again ever by anyone. This is a true story. I'm a little older than the average around here, I think, but I know what creepypasta and stuff like that is. This happened, and there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. No way. Story 2. My mum tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mum and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Mum doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mum with things like, "I don't know," and just drop it. For a long time. So a couple months later, Mum moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets up with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanor, like she was really happy and at peace, for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mum says she still doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first it was all in bits and pieces, and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, they paralyzed her somehow and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her. But by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently, they told her all sorts of things. Stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would also be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They also told her that it was not their fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They also told her that they had abducted my mother. Another time, after that first incident. Mum says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted. But she's almost sure that they're just that. Nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mum that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mom inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says that you will know eventually. And she says that once she learned of the truth, then everything became wonderful. Mom has seen her a few more times over the years. We still live in another state from her. And she apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff, like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. Story 3. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53, I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared and no car drove past. Now here is where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I am sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up, because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations, while the volume kept going up and down, while the dome light and headlights start to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why the fuck am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where the fuck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350N and 50W. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd, because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead. So I got on the phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me, since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why. I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield, more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I have only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I am sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy, or they would call bullshit on the whole story. And I can't blame them. If somebody came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. Story 4. I was on a wildfire just south of Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. We were in fire rigs driving to the incident area. 4 trucks in close convoy when we heard helicopters. 8 black military choppers escorted us in formation for like 10 miles. We assumed they were just doing drills and using us for fake target practice or something. A little while later, we are parked and about to start hiking to the fire line, when suddenly a thin column of smoke shoots probably about 200 feet into the sky. It was a good mile away, but the concussion was pretty significant when it hit us, and the noise was still ridiculously loud. We thought it was probably no big deal. We knew we were near a strike zone. A good 5 minutes later, an aircraft like nothing I have ever seen flew by us at maybe 500 feet. It was flat, black, and sort of rectangular, but with fins and wells on the underside. It was moving pretty slow and was dead silent, so I have to assume it was some sort of stealth glider. It sounds ridiculous, but it immediately reminded me of a huge, flying Batmobile, Time Burton era. After that, some military personnel got on our radio frequency and instructed us to leave the area immediately. When our crew chief asked who it was and why they signed off in the incident, Commander, the guy in charge of managing the entire situation, came on the radios and said we were evacuating the area. They sent us to a completely different fire about 100 miles to the south and never told us why, except that it was higher priority, which was bullshit. It was already out when we got there, and we just assisted crews in the mop-up operation. The thing that confuses me about this is that if the army didn't want us to see that shit, or if it was dangerous, why didn't they keep us clear of the area in the first place? Either a communications breakdown, or they had a now shit situation going down and had to get us out of there without warning. Story 5. I was traveling back home with my mom from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road a few seconds, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes, disintegrates, disappears, whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mum and I could tell by her expression she had seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplane, or a flock of geese. My mum and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it is not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. Story 6. Not my story, but my dad's. As a consequence of this not being my story, I can't insist that I know what I saw, and all that. All I can tell you is that I believe him, and he has no reason to lie to me. ... My dad has over a dozen stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois, near a woodsy area. UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad and my grandpa would sit on the porch and watch lights fly around their house for fun. This was a long time ago, when my dad was a kid. He's in his 60s now. They would watch the stars dart around like laser lights and laugh about it. Shit's mind-boggling to me now. I've only seen that kind of thing happen once or twice, and it freaked me out. Besides that, a bunch of other weird shit would happen to my dad. Some of it is pretty similar to the stuff described in this thread, actually. Isolated earthquakes in Illinois that nobody else felt. Bright orbs floating around in the sky and following him around, etc. It's been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. FYI, I'm completely aware that it sounds like my dad was just fucking with me, and trust me, I'd prefer to believe that. But I have good reasons to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything else. He wasn't the type of person to make shit up for show. He also had absolutely nothing to gain from making this shit up. He never tried to publish it or even write it down. He would just talk about it sometimes. Anyway, so my dad was in his teens, and weird UFO shit has been happening his whole life at this point. He's out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people do when they live in a woodsy rural area. His parents aren't home, they're out shopping, at work, whatever. Suddenly, this big, black car pulls into his driveway. Tinted windows, completely black. My dad just kind of watches it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here. Not only is this a rural area, but it's approximately 50 years ago. People were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays, you'd be crazy to leave your front door unlocked, but back then, it was no big deal. So this strange black car pulls into my dad's driveway. It's making no noise at all, which my dad noticed right away. The door opens, and out steps a super tall, fair-faced white man. He has blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored black suit, and black sunglasses on. Right away, my dad could see there was something off about him. He looks too perfect. Flawless skin, a childlike smile, and very overdressed for a hot summer day. He looks distinctly out of place. The man walks up to my dad and asks for his name. My dad, around 15 at the time, asks him why he wants to know. The man smiles and explains that he just wants to ask him a few questions, and he means no harm. Bemused, my dad agrees, but he's still wary of this strange man. First, the tall white dude asks my dad if he lives here. My dad says yes, and asks why he wants to know. The man has a completely relaxed, non-confrontational tone, and seems almost giddy, like he was really excited to be having this conversation. His childish, overzealous grin hadn't faded in the least. He asks my dad if he had seen, felt, or heard anything that he felt was outside of the ordinary. My dad said sometimes, and again asked why he wanted to know. The man just kept grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty comfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life. He didn't appear to be any kind of government agent. His behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changes. His grin disappears and he looks worried. Without so much as a goodbye, he opens his car door, gets inside and drives away, still making no noise at all. A couple minutes later, my dad's parents come back from shopping. Now for the really weird part. My mum saw the same fucking dude. 30 fucking years later. She was in a bookstore looking to buy something. Don't know the details really. When she turned around and noticed this tall, fair-looking blonde guy in a black suit sitting at table in the cafe, 30 feet or so from my mum. He was reading a newspaper. Sitting across from him was another dude, dressed exactly the same as the blonde one. They still looked strangely out of place. Somehow too perfect, too clean. Now, my mum had heard this story from my dad before, and she actually recognized my dad's description of this man. He definitely stood out. So she's kind of taken aback, trying to figure out if it's actually the man my dad had seen all those years ago. The blonde guy notices my mum looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changes. He stands up, turns around, and quickly walks out of the bookstore with the second guy right behind him. What the fuck, right? I'm actually freaking out a bit thinking about this. I'm 22 now, and I have to wonder if I'm going to run into this awkward blonde stalker. It's like the MIB sent their most inept agent to follow around my dad, or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family in our natural habitat. I don't fucking know. I know this is all very vague. I'm going to bring it up to my dad tonight and try to clarify a few details. I'll be honest, I've pushed this story out of my head because it weirds me out. Story 7. One night a few years back, my friend who was driving and I were taking his girlfriend home when he decided to take the long way home. As we were driving along this fairly deserted back road, I began to zone out, and I stare at this blinking red light off in the distance and casually think to myself, I wonder when they built a cell phone tower all the way out here, when suddenly it blinks and is dramatically closer than it was just a moment earlier. At this point, my friend points it out and stops in the road. It blinks once more and is directly in front and over top of us. The red light is so bright it floods the car in a deep scarlet hue. I lean forward so that I can see directly into the light. In that brief moment, I feel a flood of negative emotions. The closest description I can offer is to that of being naked under a giant microscope and having every pore examined thoroughly. I then look away from the light to my friend and ask him to drive. He barely responds, apparently in a similar state. Then he snaps out of it and starts driving. As we get a little ways down the road, I notice the red light isn't fading and the interior of the car is still clearly lit by it. I look out the window and to my horror, the light is following us and does so for approximately 1 to 2 miles. The light unexpectedly veers off to the left and comes down to ground level in a patch of trees adjacent to the road. My friend stops the car again and continues to stare at it and abruptly declares he is going to get out and look it like he is in some sort of trance. He opens the door and I grab his arm and tell him if he does, I will get in the driver's seat and leave him. That we had to leave that instant. He looks at me and seems to come to and punches the gas so hard the tires lose traction and spin. The light remains stationary as we rode away, but I've never looked at the night sky the same. Story 8. Back in spring of 1997, a group of us, neighborhood kids, were looking up at the night sky observing the Hale-Bopp comet. I grew up hours from any major city, so the view was pretty clear. After a while we started to notice a red and a white dot circling around each other, making sudden movements in every direction. Like no aircraft I have ever seen or have ever seen since. At a certain point they merged into one craft, then shot out 3 smaller crafts. Although we couldn't tell whether it was a craft, because they just appeared to be balls of light. This went on for a couple hours. Right before the lights disappeared, they accelerated at lightning-fast speed into the darkness. We all went home terrified of what we saw. The next day, on the front page of our small hometown paper, it said it received several calls. The explanation they gave was that the local airport was testing aircraft. I'm sure how much I believe that story because of what I saw. To this day, whenever I see my friends that were there that night, we'll sometimes talk about it. None of us can be sure what was saw. But to this day, none of us have ever seen anything like it. Story 9. 1997, Colorado Springs, CO. I was 8 years old, playing in the sand volleyball court at the park down the street from my house. I was engrossed in my activity, burying my collection of Happy Meal toys in the sand, and then digging them back out. Repeat. I was looking down, but decided suddenly that I needed to look up because the world around me had lost all sound. There was no longer any ambient noise. No traffic noise from the busy streets, just a block over. No more dogs barking. No more birds chirping. I looked at the street that bordered the park, and that is when I saw it. It looked like a stealth bomber turned sideways, nose leading, one wing down toward the road and the other pointed up at the sky. Completely shiny black in color, as tall as a house, shaped like an arrowhead. It was cruising the street at 3 mph, just gliding over the road. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds. As soon as it had passed behind some 2-story houses and out of my sight, I got my hearing back full force. I ran home with my piss-soaked pants and never spoke a word of it to anybody. Story 10. I was first abducted in 1987. I was 12 years old. I say abducted, but it's not like that. Actually, you go willingly. It's scary, but it's exciting, too. And they're somehow able to make you feel okay about things. It's not until later that you feel bad or like you've been violated. And they don't do a lot of probing, like raping or anything like that. That's Hollywood nonsense. They look inside of people sometimes, but they have machines that do it. Not really machines. But it's like a room where things get done and the walls are... It's hard to explain. So just imagine that all the walls are kind of like X-ray machines. That's the easiest way to describe it. Sometimes there would be others there, and they would be looking into them, or they'd put them under and cut them open. But not usually. They took tissue samples from all of us, I think, and they never put you under or give you any anesthetic or anything. They just poke you. With like those things they take samples of the ocean floor? Like that, but really small. They pull out chunks of you. It's usually done on the butt or on the lower back. Mostly they talked with me. Just questions, and they'd show me things, like television shows and things, and they'd ask me questions about them. I think the walls measure our reaction to things, too, same as they take x-rays. I don't know that, but it's the feeling that I got. They never let you ask questions about what they are doing. Even once I got friendly with a few of them, they just do not like it when you ask them questions. They hate it. You can't understand their language. It just sounds like, I'm positive that we'll never be able to communicate with them in their language. I should mention that these are the greys that you hear about, except they aren't grey. They are sort of beige, and it's clothes anyway. They aren't naked. I don't know if there are others. People say there are, but I've only ever met these. Anyway, you cannot understand them, but they can understand you. And they can put thoughts into your head, but they can't hear your thoughts. You have to speak to them. They cannot hear very well, or else they are not good understanding English. So you have to speak loudly and slowly. I don't know if they understand other languages, but I'm pretty sure they would. They're interested in all of us, in everything that goes on. They like a lot of things about our culture, too. They like some of our music. Bluegrass is their favorite, so far as I've seen. They like it a lot. They love that African instrument that looks like a gourd with 13 strings. Love it. But they cannot stand horns or horn music, so they hate classical music and jazz. I think trumpets sort of sound like their language. It's a feeling that I get, but I've never been able to ask them. They've taken me up just about every 2 years, I'd say since 1987. Just about. Sometimes it's more often, and I didn't go up at all between 1995 and 2000. They usually keep me for what feels like a day, but it turns out to be about 4 hours. Usually, the longest I stayed with them was 3 weeks. During that time, they made me make phone calls and keep up appearances. They aren't really bad. Well, I was going to say people, but they're not really bad people, or whatever. The two that I got sort of close with told me to call them Jack and Gina. I don't know if they are male or female, or even if they have different sexes, but I know that those aren't their real names. Those are just names that they told me. They will make contact with Earth on a wide scale in 2021. That's the year when they'll land here, or colonize, or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what their plan is. They don't seem to be evil or dangerous. Their planet is, so they told me anyway, a very long way away. They couldn't explain to me how far, they said, because it was too far for me to understand, and it was also close to the side. I have no idea what that meant, but it's always stuck with me. Home is too far away for you to understand, but also close to the side. We don't have anything that they want, so they told me. So I don't really know why they come here, or why they've taken so many of us up, or why they've gotten to be friends with me. They do not have any religion, and they don't need oxygen or water or trees or anything, I don't think. They don't eat people. I don't think they want to breed with us or genetically engineer us. I don't know what they want. But they've been coming here for, I'd guess, at least 10 or 20,000 years. I'm not very good about history and Upper Paleolithic and all that. But they've got video of all sorts of stuff. And they showed me video of Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon, which really were just like us humans, except they all had black skin. Way less diversity. And all sorts of other human-like things, USs or whatever. And they showed me a video of the pyramids being built, and this huge stone building that I guess is lost somewhere or was destroyed, but it was in Europe. I could tell from the video. They have video of them talking with all sorts of people all throughout the history of Earth. They showed me some of them and asked me questions about them, but I couldn't understand any of it, because I only speak English, and even English from 200 or 300 years ago is so different that I could hardly understand it. So I told them that they probably knew more about it all than I did. I was up 3 weeks ago. That was the last time. I'm pretty sure that I'll go up again in a couple of years, but I'm not sure after that. The whole program, or whatever they call it, is going to change in July 2021. I think they said 8th, but it could also have been 18th. I wasn't hearing very well. They weren't trying to intimidate me, or even to warn me, so I don't think we have anything to worry about. I hope they don't show the videos they took of me when they first started taking me up, because I was so scared and young, and they're embarrassing. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe. If you want to help in my dad's fundraiser, I would truly appreciate it. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day. You can also check my other videos on screen.